Job in the little corner of our room and kind of save it there for a time and place where when we're suffering, we need to read it. Or like me, and probably like some of you, we read Job and we pick up the book of Job and we read the beginning chapter and we're like, oh, this is pretty interesting. And then we read the second chapter and it's pretty good, and then the third and fourth, and then we start getting bored. And then we kind of skim ahead thinking, oh man, this book is 42 chapters long. And then we just read the end, and then somebody says, oh, did you read the book of Job? And yeah, I got pretty much the main point of this chapter, this book, but not really all of it. And so really, as we look at chapter 1, really God communicates to us Job's responses to real suffering. And the reason why this book is really relevant to us is we might not be able to associate with the way Job suffered or the things in which happened to him, but we are able to associate actually in the way that he suffered, the way that suffering came upon him. As we look at the first chapter of Job, we have this whole description of Job's life. He was a wealthy man, a man that God loved, and Job loved God back. And Job was one of the richest men in the world. And God gives us a description of who Job is, and then God gives us the behind-the-scenes factor of what actually went on before Job suffered. And the first thing we can notice is that we sometimes and often read this passage like Job kind of knew what was going on because we knew what was going on. But in reality, Job had no idea what was going on. And so if we almost leave out that part, that's the way in which we suffer as well. Because all of us, on any given day, suffer. Some of us are now suffering at our worst points in time. Some of us are suffering in ways that we almost don't even notice it. But none of us are living a life that's perfectly free, that's perfectly sinless, that's not without trouble. And Job has all of these things happening to him literally within a blink of an eye. It's not just one thing after a month. It's not like one son died and then next month his daughter died and then a year later his other son died. That would already be bad enough. But it's almost everything that was taken away from him. Even his health, as we'll see later on in chapter 2, was taken away from Job within a split second. And it's literally a quick change. And we can associate with the same thing. There's never a time and place where we come prepared for suffering, or a place where we know that suffering is coming in advance. I know that I've seen this commercial on TV, and I'm not sure if you have, and those who are in other countries, I'm not sure if you've seen this commercial either, but it's a commercial that advertises, I believe, for heart health or for preventing heart attacks. And they have this guy going to his mailbox and looking in his mailbox, and he sees his letter, and he opens this letter up, and in big, bold print, it says to him, "Your heart attack is coming to you in 2 weeks." Well, I'm not sure if I would like to receive a message like that anyways, but we don't have this sort of, in 2 weeks something bad is going to happen. It comes to us like a thief in the night. We can easily associate this with even being sick. One day you're feeling really well and you're running around and playing with your friends, and then the next day you wake up and you've just got this bad headache and you can barely get out of bed and you can barely open your eyes. In the same way, Job was really suffering in the blink of a second. Everything was taken away from him. And Job perhaps suffered one of the worst out of all the people in the world, of course, except for Jesus, who suffered the wrath of God. But Job was one of those who suffered most extremely. And one of the things that we can really gain from the book of Job is seeing the way in which Job responds to his suffering. And really we'll be focusing on the last really few verses of chapter 1. But God really places, I believe, this chapter or this book to show us how Job really responds to suffering. And a lot of times we look at Job and think, or look at the Job with a checklist. Okay, we need to respond this way and look this way and act this way in order for us to get through suffering. But God really wants, I believe, to show us two responses that Job has to his suffering. And so we'll be looking at the first one, and I'll be reading it for you. And his first response is this. This is from verse 20, and it says, "Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshipped." And I don't know if we've really realized the really great effect of this verse, but one of the main points that we can get from this verse is that suffering is real. And I know that that sounds like a fake phrase, but to a lot of those who are not suffering, we don't quite understand the suffering that other people are going through. And the suffering that we are going through ourselves, we really understand. And when we are going through suffering, our true attitude really comes out. What we really are and who we really are in Christ really comes out by the way we display our attitude and show our attitude. As a pastor in Chicago said, the true flavor of a tea bag really comes out in hot water. And so when we're placed in hot water, our real emotions and our real responses to suffering and pain and tribulation come out. And so the first response that Job had was that he arose and tore his robe and fell his head. And one of the interesting things to notice that at the end it says he fell on the ground and worshipped. And so God is telling us that Job's crying and Job's moaning and lamenting is in fact a part of worship toward God. And we think, well, how can that be? How can crying and lamenting be in some way an act of worship toward God? Because to us, we think when suffering, we're supposed to act the strongest and make sure that we're not supposed to show any signs of fragility. If we're Christians, we make sure that we put on a good face when we go to youth group, and if we're going through something bad, make sure that they always see that we're being strong and we don't really show our weak side. But God is telling us that it's okay to cry and it's okay to be saddened. And the reason why God calls it an act of worship is because it's us realizing from the deep depths of our heart that the world is really not supposed to be this way. Our crying and our suffering and our moaning and groaning is one of the ways in which we express deep down inside our hearts that we know that the world is not supposed to be the way that it is. And all of us respond in the same way of crying and groaning, whether we're Christian or whether we're not Christian. We respond in the same way because God has all placed deep down inside of us a way to express the deep groaning and moaning that we face. And now there's a big difference between groaning and moaning. You may think that, well, I don't know, maybe we shouldn't groan. But actually, if you look in the Old Testament, God dedicated the whole book, and he called it the Book of Lamentations. And so there's a difference between crying and expressing pain. And there's a difference between that and becoming angry and complaining toward God. And so God is telling us that it's okay to cry and it's okay to express pain. And a lot of times when we step outside of our homes into the real world, we a lot of times try to cover it up. And a lot of times we're not expressing and showing our weakness so that we can show the strength that God gives us through our suffering. Because a lot of times we're saying, and we know theologically it's right to say, God is good even though we're suffering. But we have to make sure that we actually are feeling good. We are feeling the presence of God in order to say that to someone. Because a lot of times what we're really simply doing is saying God is good while we're suffering when we really don't feel like it. So we're kind of just like lying and saying the things that we're supposed to be saying when we're instead could be saying to others, even though I don't really feel like saying it, even though God gives me the ability to say that God is good through trial and pain. So a lot of times we fake it, and a lot of times we act like things are good when things are not. Now, I have a little bit of a funny story to tell, and I know that everybody always likes me when I tell stories. And this really doesn't associate with suffering, but this associates kind of with the different attitude that we put on when we're stepping outside into the world. And so, as many of you know, I went on a trip about 3 months ago to a Potter School gathering. This is where classical track people get together, and we just basically have fun. We don't really work, so I hope that doesn't sound bad to you. But we also just really have fun. And so the great thing is that we get together each year. So this was the second year that we've been getting together, and many people are even part of this ministry, so it's great to actually know them and see them in real life. And this year we had one of those gatherings in Virginia, in a city a little bit outside of DC called Haymarket. And I had the pleasure of going there this year and just really having a lot of fun. So I was arriving there about 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and I knew all these people already from last year, but there's always this, a little bit holding back. You don't really show who you really are until like the next couple of days. It kind of takes a while to get it out because you're kind of holding in and still adjusting to all the people who were there. And yes, Abby was there as well. And so I just got there. And they were already doing all sorts of crazy things. And if you know who I am, I'm kind of a little bit calm. So they were riding on unicycles and all that stuff. And I was kind of standing back, making sure I didn't get hurt, all that stuff. And so about an hour later, they went outside and they said, "Let's go play volleyball." And Abby wasn't there yet. She would arrive about a few hours after this. So if this story doesn't sound familiar to you, that's okay. Or you'll say you're lying. No, just kidding. But this story happened before she came. This was really right at the beginning. And they said, "Let's go play volleyball." So they had the net outside. I know there's some people in here that do play volleyball. And if you're me, I'm thinking to myself, oh no, I can't play volleyball. If there's one sport that I don't want to play, or if there's one sport that I can't play, it's volleyball. I've just never had the opportunity to play. And if I do, which is like one time in 15 years, I can't hit the ball the right way. And so I just stayed back, and they were playing and diving around and, serving. Yeah, I know, Cora, I know that she's one of the people who do play volleyball. So I was just watching them play a nice game. They're like, "Matthew, do you want to serve, or do you want to try hitting this ball?" I'm like, "No, that's fine. I'll play soccer with you and kickball and all those great things, baseball, and with you later. But, I'll just kind of watch now because I don't like to embarrass myself." And they said, "Okay." And then 1 minute later, they said, "Matthew, you want to play again?" I said, "No." And they said, "Matthew, you want to play again?" I said, "No." And then they asked me again. And they're like, "Come on, just try serving the ball." I said, "Okay, let me try serving this ball." So I pick it up, and I'm one of these people that don't like to do anything wrong, especially when everybody's watching me, and especially when these people, are kind of new. And so I'm like, okay, here I go, and I say a quick prayer to God. I'm like, "God, help me hit this ball over the net. Help me get this thing off the ground." So I'm like, "How do you do it?" And they're all coming to me with these different techniques. "Put your thumb like this. No, make a fist instead. Hit it like this." And I'm like, and someone just comes to me and says, "Hit it like boom." And I'm like, "What do you mean hit it like boom? Hit it like this?" And so I'm thinking, okay, well, the best explanation I got was hit it like boom. So I throw this ball up in the air and I hit it, and it goes like directly 90 degrees to the left. And I'm thinking to myself, oh man, what is that? And the first thing I hear from people is not a laugh or a snicker. I'm hearing all this, "Yay, good job, wow." And I'm thinking to myself, these people are really nice, but this is not what they're thinking right now. They're thinking, what in the world is this guy doing? He can't even hit the ball straight. But in their minds, they're clapping. I don't know why they would be clapping. But it kind of shows the way we think. We express one way outside to each other and kind of keep what we really think inside. And I can say I've had the same experience with someone who, this sounds funny, I know, and this is nobody we know. Somebody from a piano studio I was at, he tried to punt a ball, and instead of punting the ball forwards, he punted the ball backwards over his head. I don't know how you do that. That's a skill in and of itself. But I didn't say anything, but I know in my head I was thinking, what in the world was that? So I can say that from my experience. We say one thing and think the other thing. And so God is giving us permission to actually cry and weep and to show the world that not all is right. And one of the great things by showing the world that all is not right, we can more clearly point them to the solution. And that is Jesus, who makes the world right and who makes suffering right. And so instead of saying I'm doing fine when you're really lying and not describing your real sense, you can show your weakness and show how God gives you the strength to say everything is fine, not really fine, but because God is here, things are fine. As we know the verse, it says, because we are weak, he makes us strong, not because we are strong, he makes us stronger. And so that's Job's first response. God, make sure that we can be comforted in our pain, that God doesn't say, make sure you shape up and don't cry and don't complain, because God understands what we're going through. And the second response that Job has was a really amazing and glorious response. And I think about it to myself, everybody, non-Christian or Christian, can respond in the way Job responded first, by crying and not being happy and by feeling pain. But in the second way that Job responds, you have to know Jesus when you respond like this. And he says this. He said, this is his second response after he cried. He said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And so how was Job able to say this phrase? By all the things that was going bad in his life, by all of the things that was taken away from him. And the reason why Job was able to say this phrase without getting angry or complaining or getting mad at God, he was sad and he was crying, but he wasn't angry and complaining. That's the big difference to know. That we're showing that God allows us to cry and be saddened by the pain we have. But Job was not angry and mad at God. He was saddened. So how was Job able to say this phrase of praise to God? And the reason why Job was able to say this was because he understood that all of the things that he had was given to him by God. Everything that he had, from his cattle to his sons and daughters to all of his possessions and houses and land that he owned, everything was given to him from God. He put his identity and foundation upon God instead of the things and the stuff he had. Because if he said to God, all these things are mine, my cattle are mine, I worked for this land, these kids are mine, I own them, then he would be placing all of his identity in the things he had. And when all those things are taken away, he had nothing left to say this phrase. And as a pastor said, when you're suffering and you have your foundation upon God, it brings you further into your joy. Because if your joy is already in God and not in the things you have, when all those things are taken away, all you have left is your joy in God. But if you put your joy in the things that you have and not in God, when those things are taken away, you have no joy left. And this really brings up the question to us, or this phrase, suffering a lot of times or sometimes reveals to us the things that we value too much, or the things that we put our place and foundation upon. Because suffering is something that's taken away from us that we love. If somebody says to us, you don't have to do your homework, you don't have to cut the grass anymore, that's not suffering, even though it's taken away from us. We really like that. We really don't care for it. We don't care if we have to cut the grass. We're actually happy if they say you don't have to. But if somebody says you can't play volleyball anymore, or you can't swim, or you can't be with your friends anymore, or if it gets really bad, if somebody dies in your family, somebody's taken away from you, those things that are valuable from you when taken away, are considered suffering. And not everything, but some things that we can notice, we reveal in suffering when they're taken away. And so we can ask ourselves the question, what are some of the things that we place our foundation on? Or what are the things that we built our life on that when taken away reveals to us suffering? And I want to close with another illustration and another story to kind of wrap this all up. And it's not a story really pertaining to suffering, but it's pertaining to things being taken away. And I told this story about 3 or 4 weeks ago when I was filling in for Adrian Fogg. But I'll tell it again because I believe that not many people heard it that day. I'll tell it as quick as possible. So I went to a piano camp about 4 hours away from my house, and we were, my mom dropped me off, and this was a 3-week-long piano camp. I don't really call this, a stay away from home piano camp where you have counselors and people making sure you eat and people making sure you go to the cafeteria and people making sure you walk in groups and go together. And I bet Jacob Skiles knows this because he goes to other piano camps as well. But this is what I call a camp, a do-it-yourself camp. This is a camp where you get dropped off and nobody's watching for you. Nobody's making sure you eat. Nobody's making sure that you have anybody following you or making sure you get to the locations that you need to be. Nobody's making sure that you make your lessons. Nobody's making sure that you wake up on time to get to your class. Nobody's making sure you go to bed at a certain time. You're all on your own. This is a joke, but I got there thinking, man, I'm really by myself, and I don't know what to eat. I don't know where to eat. And so when I came to the first day, they gave us a complimentary pizza. And I thought to myself, well, I better stuff myself with all this pizza in case I will not be able to eat for 2 weeks. And that's really just a joke. But in my mindset, I thought, well, I better eat all this food because I'm not sure if I'll be able to find food in the next day or so. So I was dropped off in a place with an unknown location. And I really, really felt terrible. When the reality sunk in and my parents left and I was sitting in my dorm room with a person that was in there. What's his name? What do they call those people? I'll call it a dorm buddy, but I know they're not called dorm buddies. He was in there and he couldn't even speak English. So I was sitting in the room all by myself, just thinking to myself, what in the world am I doing here for 3 weeks? Everything is taken away. Roommate, exactly, Abby. I don't know why I couldn't remember that. And I thought to myself, everything is taken away from me. I don't know where anything is. I don't know where the music building is. I don't know where to get food. I don't know how I'm going to make it. There's no way to protect me or watch over me. I have to walk on the streets all by myself. Nobody is here for me. My parents are 4 hours away. And I was pretty sad at that point in time. Now, you probably want to ask the question, did I cry? I know that's the question that everybody likes to ask. And I'll respond to it in this way. Maybe, but not really. But it was something where I wanted to call my parents and say, if this doesn't work out, you better bring me back because I'm ready to come back. Drag me back home. I don't care what it takes. But as I sat there in my room, really realizing I had nothing left, the thought came upon me that this is in a very, very small way, not at all like Job felt, but in a very, very, very tiny way that Job felt. Because everything that he had was taken away from him. And for me, everything that I placed my hope in and built my somewhat foundation upon was not there. My parents were not there to make sure I had food. My mom was not there to cook for me. My parents were not there to make sure I felt comforted and make sure to walk with me. That was safe. My parents were not there to show me where the closest grocery store was to buy food. My brother was not there to comfort me. I didn't know a single soul there. So I had no friends there. And I didn't know anything at all about the place. And so everything I placed my hope in, my parents and my brother and my friends, and just the knowledge of me knowing places. I didn't even know it, so I couldn't even place hope in my own knowledge of knowing where things was. And so in that sort of sense, everything was taken away. And when everything is taken away, you think to yourself, well, all I have left now is the Bible that was on my desk and God. And one of the amazing things that God does is that when you're in a situation like that, God really grants us grace. So as I was sitting in that room, God didn't say, this is what you deserve. You placed your foundation and hope in these people, and now you deserve to be left alone. See, this is how it feels. You deserve this, and I'm going to leave you like this for 3 weeks, and now you'll really learn a lesson, and maybe when you come back, you'll be able to understand something a little better. But that's not the way in which God works. He reminds us of what it feels like not to have anything and what it feels like to place your hope on other things and not in Him. But when we recognize that God always is able and will always help us and comfort us, and as I made my way through the camp, God provided me with many opportunities. He provided me with many performance opportunities and many opportunities to meet new friends and teachers and, of course, many nice places to eat. He helped me get from place to place, and it was a pretty dangerous area, and I had to walk around by myself at 10 o'clock. But every single time I had to walk around at 10 o'clock, there was always someone from the piano camp that offered me a ride back in their car. And so God always made sure that I was safe. And God always had His eye and all of His knowledge there out for me. And so when we look at the book of Job and we see Job's two responses, it's really okay to cry because God understands. And because God understands and cares for us, so much so that He sent His Son to die on us and suffered the worst suffering that He could ever suffer, which is the wrath of God, because He did that, He cares and He understands for us. And because He cares and understands for us, we can praise Him even in our deepest pain and tears. And I know none of us have really experienced deepest pain and tears yet. Or maybe some of us have, but I haven't. But one of the things that we can really feel comforted in is knowing that it's okay to express pain. God understands that. And by expressing pain, God can fill us up with the only joy that He can give us. And that if our foundation is built upon God, it brings us closer into God, because when everything is taken away from us, we only have our greatest joy, which is God, left. And in that we can make sure that when we suffer, our foundation is placed upon God, not in the things that we have. So we can pray. Father, thank You for this gathering today, and that we were able to learn something about Job and his life and the way in which he suffered and the way in which he responded to suffering. And we now pray that You would all send us out into the world to show and share Your glorious grace, and also help that grace and peace be more real to our own lives. I also now ahead of time pray for Simeon, who will be speaking next week. I pray that You would give him the wisdom and knowledge to communicate everything